The human brain can produce some truly great ideas. We've achieved so much and invented so many things that improve the quality of our lives. From fire to antibiotics to robotics, we're always trying to one-up ourselves and make things bigger, better, and easier. And yet, there are some inventors, ideas, and decisions that were, well, let's just say their consequences were not what we had anticipated. Hi, you're watching Wisey. Today, we're going to talk about some of the worst mistakes in the history of humankind. But first, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos about anything and everything. Plastic. Whenever people talk about the worst inventions, plastic always comes up somewhere on the list. I mean, they don't call it the cancer of the planet for nothing. Although the first plastics were invented in 1862, they weren't produced on a large scale until the 1950s. And since then, we've only been making more and more and more. Right now, there are about 8.3 billion tons of plastic in the world, 6.3 of which is trash. Now, let's admit that this invention has led us to some huge innovations. From disposable syringes to smartphones, it also allows us to produce more affordable products since it's cheap. But you also have to admit that we're really gone overboard with our plastic use. I mean, look at this. Why would you wrap fruit in cling film if it already has thick skin? There's already so much pointless plastic, and yet we keep producing unnecessary packaging and useless products. Is there any way to avert the damage that's been done? Well, the least we can do is reduce plastic use. Recycle what's already been produced and use the types of plastics that are more readily recyclable. Or even better, replace them with more eco-friendly materials, like paper and glass. And we also need urgent evidence-based policies that rely on science. Speaking of which, let's discuss one of the most poorly informed policies in history. For Pests campaign. In 1958, the People's Republic of China started the Great Leap Forward, a reconstruction program that was supposed to turn the country into a communist paradise, but instead became a major humanitarian disaster. The For Pets campaign was one of the first actions under this project. It involved the complete extermination of mosquitoes, rats, flies, and sparrows, as each of these species was considered to be a threat to public health and China's economic growth. Mosquitoes and rats were targeted for spreading disease, flies for being pervasive, and sparrows for eating grain and fruit, thus disrupting agricultural production. But what the communist government failed to realize was that in an ecosystem, every species has its role, and it turned out that sparrows played a crucial role in maintaining its balance. You see, these birds don't just eat grain. They also feed on small insects, controlling their populations and thus actually aiding in pest control. So as China went to war with sparrows, locust swarms destroyed the harvest, causing much more damage than the birds did in the first place. A massive grain shortage followed, and afterward, the Great Chinese Famine that killed at least 15 million people in the 3 years between 1959 and 1961. And that's an official government figure. Some modern experts believe that the death toll was up to 55 million. I guess the moral of this story is do not mess with Mother Nature. By the way, here's a little Wisey fact of the day about sparrows. Didn't you know that they're carnivores by nature? Yeah, originally these birds preferred feeding on insects, but as they started living in close proximity to humans, they changed their eating habits out of the convenience and became more like scavengers that will eat almost anything. Next, let's talk about a mistake that was as much due to human factors as it was a result of wider systemic issues. Chornobyl. April 26, 1986. It was the middle of the night in Pripyat, Ukraine, then part of the USSR, when one of the nuclear reactors at the Chornobyl power plant exploded, causing the worst nuclear disaster in history. Millions of acres of land were contaminated, and the radiation affected every living thing in its reach, bringing death and disease. Why did it happen? First of all, the plant continued operating even though it was in an extremely unstable condition. Therefore, safety precautions were violated. Secondly, Chernobyl's personnel were inadequately trained to operate the reactor and cope with an emergency situation like that. Thirdly, there were flaws in the design of the plant's containment structures that allowed radioactive material into the atmosphere. And lastly, the emergency response of Soviet authorities was inadequate to say the least. They botched the evacuation of residents and tried to cover up the disaster from the world and their own people for as long as they could. But eventually, it proved impossible as radiation spikes were caught far beyond Ukrainian borders, even in Sweden. When you look at these factors, it becomes clear that the disaster could have been prevented, and considering Chernobyl's impact, it's no wonder why it became the biggest anti-advertisement campaign for nuclear power, which is unfortunate considering that when all the safety protocols are met, it's actually one of the safest and cleanest sources of energy. Let's do a little quiz to put things in perspective. Can you guess which of these energy sources is the most dangerous to produce? A. Nuclear power, B. Brown coal, or C. Oil? And the answer is B. Brown coal. Statistically, it is the deadliest energy source, resulting in almost 33 deaths for each terawatt-hour of energy produced. Oil is in third place with a death rate of 18.5, and nuclear power comes sixth by a huge margin. It may be hard to believe, but the death rate from its production is only 0.07. In fact, nuclear power and renewables are the safest and cleanest sources of energy, while fossil fuels are the most dangerous and polluting. It means that despite the accidents that happened in the past, we shouldn't give up on nuclear power. What we should do is implement adequate safety precautions, build safer nuclear power plants, make sure that only properly trained specialists are allowed to operate them, and create a strong emergency response to deal with potential accidents. And now for the last entry on our list. In 1987, American scientist and author Jared Diamond published a breakthrough article that continues to generate discussion even today, and it was titled "The Worst Mistake in the History of the Human Race." Agriculture. Agriculture. I know what you're thinking. How can agriculture be a bad thing? It's a means to our sustenance, our first step towards a better quality of life, and, well, it's true, but things aren't that simple. We all know for a fact that agriculture contributes to climate change, deforestation, biodiversity loss, irrigation problems, pollution, soil degradation, waste, and much more. However, Jared Diamond argues that agriculture also lies at the base of all technological advancements that came after it. So, therefore, it's the root cause of all of our problems. And it's not just about the environment. Diamond writes, with agriculture comes the gross social and sexual inequality, the disease and despotism that curse our existence. Hunter-gatherers practice the most successful and longest-lasting lifestyle in human history. In contrast, we're still struggling with the mess into which agriculture has tumbled us, and it's unclear whether we can solve it. Diamond definitely has a point here. To put things into perspective, humans were hunters and gatherers for much longer than we've been farmers. Think 300,000 years versus 12,000. So, it's obvious which lifestyle has proved to be more successful and long-lasting. Granted, we used to have much shorter lifespans, but the survival of our species as a whole was not an issue. So, does it mean we should revert to picking berries and chasing deer? That would be unlikely, but Diamond's article gives some food for thought, as he suggests that uncontrolled scientific progress may ultimately lead humanity to extinction. All those discoveries and inventions that allow us to live longer and happier lives, are they worth the price that we might have to pay? If Diamond is right and humanity faces extinction, then I doubt anyone would disagree that agriculture was indeed humanity's biggest mistake. But we're not there yet, thankfully. There is still time to avert the apocalypse, and that's exactly what we should be focusing on right now. Of course, humans have made a lot more mistakes and caused a lot more damage throughout history. The ones we've just discussed are just a drop in the ocean. But it's important to look back and face up to these decisions, especially if they were wrong. It's the only way to move forward. And what do you think was the biggest mistake in the history of humanity? Tell us in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting content about anything and everything. Thanks for watching, and make sure to tune in next time.